want to talk to you about being an Alzheimer's caregiver. And one of the important things about caring for somebody with Alzheimer's is statistically 60% of people who care for somebody with Alzheimer's actually pass away first. And part of why that is because of the toll it takes on the caregiver. So Alzheimer's can a lot of times be a very long diagnosis. So the average stay in a nursing home, which is kind of the end of the road, that's the part where you need 24-hour nursing care. The average stay in a nursing home for somebody with Alzheimer's is 8 years. But prior to that, that person has been cared for in the home for a number of years and may have lived in an assisted living or memory care. The reason why I wrote a book on Alzheimer's and the reason why I give speeches on Alzheimer's is I actually had 2 women who died from pneumonia who were clients of mine. And actually, I think they both died from exhaustion. They were both caring for their husbands. They both, over the years of caring for their husbands, didn't take really good care of their own health. So they both needed certain treatments, certain surgeries that they put off. They put off regular medical care for themselves because they were caring for their husbands 24 hours a day. And both of them, their husbands weren't sleeping well, which meant that they were having to, when they went to bed at night, they were having to listen and wake up multiple times during the night if their husband got out of bed. So today we're going to be just talking about taking care of yourself, making sure that in the event you're caring for somebody else that you remember to take care of yourself. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about our firm. We've helped over 8,000 families protect the assets that they leave to their loved ones from divorce, creditors, and lawsuits. We've helped over 300 families implement the plans that we've designed, and over 1,200 families implement the plans that other attorneys have designed. And why that's significant to you is because estate planning is kind of depressing. So you're going to want to put together a plan, put it on the shelf, and forget about it. But what's important to you is it works when it's actually needed. And one of the things that's unique about our firm is that we do both the estate planning and elder law. So the elder law, as we watch people progress through life, we're able to help them throughout all stages. So estate planning is trying to think through who gets your stuff when you die. It's also thinking through if you become incompetent, who takes care of you. Elder law is more protecting whenever somebody has become incompetent and trying to make sure that they're protected along the way. Our firm is unique in that you get the experience of not only the attorneys in our office, but of 3,000 attorneys nationwide from the organizations we belong to. So we can learn from those attorneys, make sure that things are done how you want them done, and that they work smoothly when something happens. So I've got 4 books, and if you want a copy of them, you can contact our office and we'll send you a free copy. The first one is my most popular book, which is the Who Gets Your Stuff When You Die. If you look on the website, there's an entire 45-minute speech on that. The 2 books in the middle are Will Your Family Know What to Do If Something Happens to You, or Will Your Spouse Know What to Do If Something Happens to You? And it has a lot of checklists and information to give people. Those checklists are also on the website if you want a place to fill those out. And then the last book is the one that's most relevant for today, and it's Finding Strength in the Face of Alzheimer's. And it looks at it from 2 perspectives. It looks from it as a caregiver, what do you need to know? But also it looks at it from the perspective of if you have Alzheimer's, what do you need to know? So I'm going to talk to you first about communication as a caregiver, just give you some tips along the way. The first one is never argue. And really, it's got to be a matter of you've got to somewhat enter into their reality. So for instance, if your mom thinks that your dad is still alive, if every day when your mom says something about when is my husband coming home, if every day you remind her that he's passed away, then you're causing her to have to go through that grief over and over. If instead, if you enter into her reality, and in her reality he's still alive, and you can come up with what you feel comfortable with. So if you can, think through in the time period she thinks it is, where would he be? So is he at work and he'll be home later? Is he on a business trip and he'll be home later? But you've got to be consistent with what she would think he would be doing. The other thing is occasionally I'll run into somebody who is very black and white to the point where they never want to tell anything that's not 100% true. So you can answer then with he's not here right now, or I'm not sure where he is at the moment, or things like that in order to keep her comfortable. But no matter what, re-traumatizing her by reminding her that he's not here is not a good solution. And then the next tip I would give you is to never reason. So Jerry Sams used to run a company called Jerry Options here in town. She was a wonderful social worker. And she actually ran an Alzheimer's support group for a number of years. And one of the pieces of advice she gave that was really good is you cannot reason with someone who cannot reason. So a lot of times when somebody has Alzheimer's or they have dementia, they get to the point where they really can't reason things out. And so if you're trying to appeal to them logically, they no longer have the ability to do that. And so to think through how you can approach it in a way that helps them be able to think through it without trying to have them reason. The next one is never shame or embarrass. So when you're dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, think through how you would want to be talked to. Because a lot of people tend to take on a more critical parent type tone with the people that they're taking care of. But if you think about it, they're not intentionally forgetting things. They're not intentionally asking you the same questions. So if you try to shame or embarrass them for doing that, it's just not productive as far as how you need to treat them. Also, never lecture them. So never scold them, never lecture them, never make it where it's just an uncomfortable conversation. And then a trigger word for a lot of people with Alzheimer's is the word remember. So never say remember. So if you were to go to the person with Alzheimer's and say, remember the trip we took to the Grand Canyon, just by saying the word remember, they start stressing out about whether they can remember the trip to the Grand Canyon. A better way to approach it would be to get out pictures from when you went to the Grand Canyon, to say, do you remember standing on the South Rim and how beautiful it was looking across, or the sunset that we saw across the Grand Canyon. Or a story that I could tell is James and I years ago went to the Grand Canyon, and when we first got there, it was entirely covered with clouds, and so you could not see it. And so there were people there on the edge of the Grand Canyon who had driven thousands of miles to see it, and there was no Grand Canyon to see because of the clouds. Now, the very next morning when we went out, the clouds had parted, and we were able to see the entire Grand Canyon. And it was, to us, it was as though God decided to reveal it to us at that particular time. And it made it more special because we went from not being able to see it all to suddenly being able to see it. So if I was talking to James about that memory, it'd be better to show him pictures of before when we couldn't see the Grand Canyon, and then after, and then describing it in detail in a way that he could experience it whether he remembers or not. Other important thing to never say is I told you. So to say, Mom, I've told you 15 times that the appointment with the doctor is at 1 o'clock tomorrow. They're not asking the question to hassle you. It really is they can't remember. Now, sometimes you can come up with ways to help them. So one of the things that a lot of my clients will do is they will get a big calendar, put it on the wall, and then on the days, they'll put some sort of marker so that the person knows which day it is, and then what activities are going to happen on that day. So that gives them a place where if they want to remember when the doctor's appointment is, they can go to that big calendar and look and see. And if they still have the mental capacity to do that, that's one way to deal with the repetitive questions is when things are happening. Also, if you can use technology, so you can have your phone tell you that in 15 minutes it's time to go to lunch or to eat breakfast or to take certain pills, so there's ways that you can use things like that to help them remember. Also, never say you can't. So if you tell them they can't drive, then they're more likely to want to drive or to be somewhat assertive that they're responsible enough to be able to do things. So instead, it's actually better to distract. So if someone's insisting that they want to drive, and it's not safe for them to drive, then just try to distract them onto something else so that they're not focused on continuing to try to drive. Now, one of the hardest things as a caregiver is to figure out how to restrict access to the car. So some of my clients have actually been able to, when they're caring with someone with Alzheimer's, they're able to disable the car, and they disable the car so that way that person can't drive. But let me tell you a couple stories where that went really wrong. So one of the stories was they had actually disconnected the battery cable so that way the car would not start. The father actually called a mobile mechanic, got him to come out, spent quite a bit of money in order to get it fixed. So sometimes it's a matter of those little things sometimes work, sometimes don't. The other thing that sometimes works, especially if they're starting to lose their memory on things, is to hide the keys. So if you hide the keys and they're not able to find the keys, then that keeps them from driving. I had a client that they came up with a very creative solution to keep their dad from driving that ended up backfiring. So what they did is they borrowed dad's truck so that a grandson could drive it for a period of time. And then they hoped that dad would not remember how long it had been. So they kept telling him that the grandson still needed it. And so the dad eventually demanded his truck back. He ended up calling the sheriff's department, reporting it stolen. And the sheriff's department told the daughter that if she did not return the truck within 24 hours, that the sheriff would have no choice but to press criminal charges for stealing the truck. So they had no choice but to give him back the truck. So sometimes the trying to negotiate or trying to figure out how to get the car out of somebody's access is hard. Other thing is you can actually report somebody to the Department of Motor Vehicles as an unsafe driver. Now, one of the dangers to that is that they're allowed to take that driving test as many times as they need to. So one of my clients reported her aunt as somebody who was unable to drive safely. So the aunt got a letter in the mail saying she had to come in and take a driving test. She came in and took that driving test 7 times, failed it all 7 times. So then what she did is the test every time was the same. They drove the exact same route. And so what she did is she practiced that route and ended up passing and getting a driver's license. And so the family said that they had no doubt that the aunt could drive safely on the exact route the test was done, but if she tried to drive anywhere else, she would not be able to do it. So one of the dangers of reporting somebody is if they are able to get it together for a day or two, practice, they might still be able to maintain the license. But it at least keeps people who are completely unsafe driving from being able to drive. So this next one is in the same realm of how do you want to be talked to? So never command or demand. So if somebody was trying to get you to do something, how would you want them to talk to you? Think through that and how you communicate with the one you're trying to get to accomplish certain things. Also, never be condescending in how you talk to somebody. So a lot of times when a child is taking care of a parent, the roles kind of reverse, but still remember the fact that this person is your parent and they require a certain amount of respect. So talking to them like they're a little child, it can be extremely insulting. Also, you're probably more likely to get a lot more pushback if you do that. So also be aware of nonverbal communication. So I had a mother and daughter come in the other day. The mother was explaining to me that she did not have any memory problems. She didn't understand why the daughter thought that she did. And her daughter was actually in her line of sight rolling her eyes. And I'm not even sure that the daughter realized her body language, just how she was communicating to her mother that she didn't believe what her mother was saying. So think through not only how you talk to people, the words you say, you need to think of tone when you think of words, but then also what does your body say? How are you communicating that way? And then one of the important things, now at the beginning I told you 60% of caregivers die before the person diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Now I told you one of the reasons is that it's a long diagnosis. So the person with Alzheimer's can live a long time. The other thing that a lot of my clients point out is the person with Alzheimer's, especially as the disease progresses, a lot of times that person has absolutely no worries, so they're a lot less likely to have illnesses related to stress. But another reason why caregivers pass away first is they forget to take care of themselves. So I talk to people all the time that they have surgery that they need to have done or procedures they need to have done to take care of their own health that they neglect to do because they're caring for someone. The other thing that I mentioned is the 24-hour nature of taking care of somebody. So if you are during the night, listening to see if they get up, because you're worried if they get out of bed, they might slip or fall, or they might get disoriented as to where they are. You're not actually getting good quality sleep. So if you have people who are willing to help you, it'd be good to do that occasionally, to have them stay during the night so you can get an actual good night's sleep, so you can take care of yourself. So some of the signs of caregiver stress are similar to the stages we go through when we lose a loved one. So a lot of how you're processing what's going on is going to go through those stages. So stages of grieving, and actually they now say that you do all these stages all together. It's not linear, but it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So as a caregiver, it is not unusual for you to get angry or frustrated with the person that you're taking care of. Now, I mentioned earlier Jerry Sams. The support group that she ran for years still exists. And if you can find an Alzheimer's support group, it's a good place for you to be able to be honest about your feelings with other people that'll fully understand what you're going through. Because they'll understand that you still love the person you're taking care of, but you get frustrated with them on a day-to-day basis. And you're frustrated about the situation that you're in. And while you're going through this, you're also grieving a loss. So you're grieving the loss of who your spouse was or who your parent was. And it's kind of a weird dynamic because you're grieving a loss, but the person is still there and you're still taking care of them. So it's a weird dynamic that other people that are going through it are going to understand it better than anyone as far as how you're feeling about things. You're also losing whatever your life would have been like if you weren't caring for this person. So whatever, especially if it's a spouse, whatever plans you would have had, whatever things you would be doing, traveling, enjoying life, enjoying retirement, things you thought would happen at this stage of life that are not necessarily happening because you're in a caregiver role. And even with taking care of parents, you're losing whatever other things you would be doing during that period of time. And so it's natural to have these feelings, and it's good to find some place that you have a safe outlet for it. So either support groups or maybe counseling, some ways that you can actually talk to people on an honest basis as to what's actually going on. The other thing that happens when you're caring for somebody else is a lot of social withdrawal, because a lot of times when you're around other people, they're not going to necessarily understand your situation. They're not going to necessarily be sympathetic to what you're doing. You're also exhausted from the caregiving, so you may not have the energy to spend time with other people. The other thing that happens related to caregiver stress is depression. So you may become depressed over time. And if that's the case, you need to seek treatment. And one of the important things is when you're caring for somebody else, if you don't take care of yourself, then who's going to take care of the one you're taking care of? So if you get to the point, my two ladies that I told you about at the beginning that died from pneumonia, then somebody else had to step in and take care of their husbands. And you may have the inability to concentrate. Because if you think about it, you're under an incredible amount of stress. And so a lot of times the caregiver will start having some memory problems, some trouble making decisions, because they're under a lot of stress. Other thing that I see a lot in couples is, especially if the one who is dominant, the one that has made most of the decisions throughout the marriage, is the one who gets Alzheimer's or dementia, the one that's now in the caregiver role and suddenly for the first time in 30 or 40 years having to make decisions, it can be extremely overwhelming. And so it's worth reaching out, trying to get help, find resources to help you make those decisions. So ways to combat stress, and they're the same whether you have somebody you're caring for or not, but it's something just to think through. You need to learn to relax. You need to learn to ask for help. So a lot of times people will come to you and they'll say, if you need anything, just let me know. One of the things that I recommend is you come up with a list of little things, really small things to ask for initially. Because some of the people that say, if you need any help, I'm here to help you, don't fully mean it. A lot of them do. But one of the ways to test it out is to ask them to do a small thing. So for instance, you could say, next time you're at the grocery store, can you pick up eggs and a loaf of bread for me? and I'll reimburse you for it. And then if that person is willing to do that errand, then you can ask them for more as time goes on. Or you might ask them to just stay with your loved one for an hour while you go to the grocery store. Or, like I said, just little tasks along the way to see if that person really does want to help. But if you think about it, if you were volunteering to help one of your good friends, would you be willing to do that? Wouldn't you want to do that? And wouldn't it be a blessing for you to be able to do that? And so you're really allowing that person to feel good about helping you and being able to step in. Now, if you hit them initially with a large task that's very complicated, they may not offer again. And that's part of why I'm thinking if you can do smaller things along the way, and then you can kind of ferret out who actually wants to help and to what level they want to help. I've already mentioned the support groups. Now, a lot of the support groups will actually have activities for the people with Alzheimer's or dementia. So the one that Jerry Sams ran, and her company still exists, it's called Jerry Options. And they have an Alzheimer's support group where they have the caregivers are in one room. And then they have graduate students that work with the people with Alzheimer's and dementia doing certain games or exercises depending on what their level is. So that way the caregivers can have an honest conversation without their loved one in the room, and their loved one has activities to do at the same time. And so to find something like that gives you a little bit of camaraderie, also gives you a little bit of a break. Also, it's very important for all of us to have physical activity. So to continue to exercise, to continue to do activities other than just caregiving. So let me talk to you a little bit about what you might want to adjust in your estate plan if you or your loved one have an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Now, I told you a minute ago, a lot of times when somebody gets a diagnosis like this, we go through the same stages as we do when we grieve. So the initial thing that most people do when they get this diagnosis is they go into denial. They assume it's not happening to them or it's not going to happen as bad as other people. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, but I've heard it many times. If you know one person with Alzheimer's, you know one person with Alzheimer's. And what's meant by that is everybody progresses differently. And so some people get an Alzheimer's diagnosis and it may be 10 years before people outside the family would realize they have a problem. There are some people that it happens a whole lot faster. And so we really don't know how quickly you or your loved one are going to lose your ability to make decisions. So for estate planning purposes, in order to make an estate plan, to do a will or a trust, you've got to know who your family is, you've got to know what your assets are, and you've got to hold those two ideas in your head long enough to make a logical decision. Now, if you haven't been around somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia, they can be diagnosed with it for years before they lose those abilities. Some of them lose it faster, and some of them it's slower. Now, I had many years ago, I had a couple come in. The husband had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 10 years before they came in. At the point they came in, he did not know how to spell his own name, could not sign his name. He didn't know who his wife was, other than he knew he liked her and he trusted her, but he couldn't tell me that they were married. He didn't know the names of the kids, and he didn't know what assets they own. So at that stage, he cannot do a plan. We cannot put together a will or a trust or any other estate planning documents for him because he doesn't know who the family is. If he had come in instead, back when the diagnosis had first happened, when he still knew who the family was, we could have put together a plan. Now, for some people, when we put together a plan at that stage, we've got to talk through if you become incompetent, if things progress, who do you want to have be in charge? And he could have at that stage made that decision. But the hard thing is to admit that that might happen. Now, in some of my other speeches, I talked through the fact that it could happen to any of us. But once you get that diagnosis, it's really a crucial time to talk to an attorney about making sure your plan is in place and it does what you want it to do. Now, I try to mention in every speech, most families are dysfunctional, and one of the reasons why you're going to want to put together a plan while you still can is to make sure that none of the dysfunctional people in your family try to be in charge of you medically or financially. So another important thing is if you or a loved one have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, is to have the person that's been diagnosed look at their estate plan. Now, people who have not been around somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia may not realize that when you first get diagnosed, you're not incompetent as far as being able to put together estate planning documents. Most people, at the moment they get diagnosed, they still know who their family is, they still know who their assets are, they still know what year it is, and they're still able to hold those ideas in their head long enough to make a logical decision. So at the stage where you're still competent, you can make decisions regarding who's in charge medically and financially for you. But the other important thing is to think through, if you're a married couple and your spouse has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, we've got to think through, kind of a hard thing, but what if the healthy spouse dies first? So one of the things that I recommend is we talk through whether we want to change the documents to say that if the spouse without the diagnosis dies first, that the money is still available for the person with Alzheimer's or dementia, but it's done in a way that it's protected in case they need to go to the nursing home, and it's done in a way that it's protected against them making bad decisions regarding the money. Now, sometimes when somebody's first diagnosed, they're not quite ready to talk about giving up control. And in that case, one of the things we talk about is setting up a living trust. We can set it up where that person is still in charge. We will talk through adding on somebody to be a co-trustee, somebody there to be a check and balance to make sure that the person with Alzheimer's or dementia doesn't make bad decisions regarding the money. Because one of the hard things with a diagnosis like that is you may not know you're making bad decisions. So a lot of times by the time the family figures out you're making bad decisions, you've already made really bad decisions. Let me give you an example. One of our clients, her dad sold family land for $50,000. He had 100 acres. He sold the 100 acres for $50,000. He sold it to a neighbor, and the neighbor said the reason why he thought he gave him such a good deal on the land is because they had been neighbors forever, and they'd both talked about the fact that how most farmland was being developed, and they both agreed that they didn't want the land to be developed. So the neighbor thought he sold it to him cheap, so that way he would keep it as part of the bigger tract and it would stay farmland. The way the daughter found out that the dad had sold the land is he called her up all excited because he had sold the land for $50,000, and he was so proud because he had bought it for only $5,000 and he'd made this incredible profit. But what he wasn't thinking through is the number of years he had held it and what it was actually worth now. Now, this daughter actually went to court with the neighbor on her dad's behalf, tried to say that the neighbor should have known he was incompetent because he shouldn't have sold it for such a cheap price. The daughter lost because there was no proof that the neighbor knew that he was having trouble. The daughter didn't know he was having trouble until he sold the land for what he did. And it was quite clear when she talked it through that he didn't realize how long he had owned it or what it was actually worth at this time. So a co-trustee is a way to have a protection against that. But also we can set it up where if the healthy spouse dies first, like I said, the money's available for the surviving spouse. We do it in something called a supplemental needs trust. The money can be used for anything the surviving spouse needs, but whatever's left can then go to the family members instead of having to go to the nursing home. So what is the biggest fear of older adults? It's running out of money. And statistically, they say that in the last 6 months of your life, you spend more on healthcare than you do in your entire lifetime. And the cost of nursing home care is part of that. So locally, if you were to need 24-hour nursing care and you were to live in a nursing home, it's about $96,000 a year. If you were to be cared for in the home, it's over $180,000 a year. So the amount of assets that can eat through are great. And so that's part of why we may need to talk about, if you get a diagnosis like this, how do we protect assets just in case you need to go to the nursing home? Now, Medicaid has a 5-year look back on gifts. VA benefits have a 3-year look back. I have another seminar on my website. It's entitled Elder Law, and it talks through how to protect assets for Medicaid and for veterans benefits. But at the point you have a diagnosis, that's a time that we need to talk through protecting assets just in case you need care. So if you're interested in a copy of our book, Finding Strength in the Face of Alzheimer's, if you'll contact our office, we'll send you a free copy of that. Also, as I mentioned, you might want to watch the seminar on Medicaid. We've also got a seminar on living trust that talk through why it would be important if you've got somebody who has some incapacity problems. We would love to meet with you to customize a plan to your individual family situation. Everybody's different in how they want to put together things, and we would love to meet with you to talk through how to protect yourself and how to protect your family.